you know, before dinner came, or before, worst case scenario, before they shut down. And more than once, I remember being at the end of a long line and having some guy walk out and saying, "You're not going to make it. Hope you've got gas to go around the lake," because of course the bridge wasn't there. On an official level, I first became involved with the Stow Ferry in 1983. Back then I was a county attorney. The county owned and operated the ferry, and the Sea Line Project made an offer to acquire it. And I wrote, as the attorney, I wrote the first lease agreement between the county and the Sea Line Project, leasing the ferry for $1 a year. After that was signed, a few months later, I remember distinctly getting a memo from our finance director, Marshall Nelson, our finance director, pointing out that they had not paid their $1 annual fee. So I reached in my pocket, took out $1, stapled it to his memo, and sent it back. And this is history in the making. This is why we still have it operating today, I'm sure. I'm not quite sure if the county would have actually foreclosed and taken it back, you know, but we covered that minor oversight. Obviously, one of the people that had a huge impact on the ferry for many, many years was Art Thomas. And Art was on the Sea Line Project and took the responsibility of recruiting people to operate the ferry. And you do have to have a state license. You have to be a licensed pilot engineer. And in order to get that license, you have to take a test. And that test questions you on all those important criteria you need to know, like navigation, currents, tides, and all the things that you might need to know in order to operate a ferry back and forth that's attached to cables. I passed that test and was, yes, thank you. I know there's a lot of concern whether I might be able to do so. And I operated, and the biggest challenge, of course, was to remember to throw the engines into reverse before you got to the end of the cable so you didn't run into the embankment. A lot of fun. One story I'll share with Art. I mean, Art really had his heart, and this was really his love. One of the individuals that he recruited, a guy named Ted DeFrancisco, as a volunteer. No one was paid. And Ted was as honest and straight as you will ever find in an individual. In fact, Ted was a retired police chief from Orchard Park or Cheektowaga up there. Ted never even had a traffic ticket. Can you imagine that? Never had a ticket until he operated the Bemus Point Stow Ferry. Now, he didn't get a ticket for speeding, but he did get a ticket for operating the ferry with an expired registration. He never realized, and of course he was just a volunteer, the Sheriff's Patrol boarded the ship, inspected it, and gave him a ticket. Now, that ticket was returnable in North Harmony. That ticket was returnable in North Harmony in front of Art Thomas, who had recruited Ted. And I appeared on behalf of the board. I was doing legal work for them at this point, and suggested to Art that there might be a conflict of interest. And so Art reluctantly agreed and referred it across the street to, across the way to Jim Burns, who was a JP in Bemus Point. And I appeared in front of Jim Burns, a retired state trooper, with Ted, a retired police chief, and he was very embarrassed. And Jim was very serious. We have this ticket. According to the allegations of the officer, you were driving the ferry while it was unregistered. And Jim sat behind a big desk and he said, let me show you what we do with these tickets. He pulled open the drawer, he swept the ticket into the desk drawer and he closed it and he said, next case. What a great occasion to be here. 200 years of history in the making. What a tremendous asset to Chautauqua County. It really adds to the character. Thank you so much for inviting me. I look forward to seeing you in another 200 years as we dedicate it again. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Assemblyman Goodell. Our first representative from Chautauqua County is our county executive, Mr. Greg Edwards. Mr. Edwards.
Good luck. Thanks, Appreciate it. What is a great day to be here for all the reasons that have already been mentioned and many more that will be mentioned as well. And I've had the distinct pleasure of serving as your county executive for the last 5 years, but I have to tell you that I particularly enjoyed this year because it's given me an opportunity on repeated occasions to celebrate our history and the things that have made us great for many years, and as has already been said, will continue for many years thereafter. And we'll have a chance, I'm sure, to learn about the history and some specifics as others speak, but I'll just tell you from my observation, we're here today celebrating because this ferry began out of necessity. It has been successful for many, many years because it's provided an essential service. And it continues because it's an important part of our history that so many partners are here today to celebrate. So many previous partners have dedicated such time to make successful, and we will continue to do so as we go forward. I do have a proclamation, and I rarely read these. I'm rather judicious in the number that I produce because I think that they're important documents. But for today, because it's such a significant time we find ourselves, I'll read this short proclamation. And this is from the office of the county executive of our county, Chautauqua County. Whereas Thomas Bemus first built a flat-bottomed raft to begin his ferry business in 1811. And whereas the Bemus Point Stow Ferry immediately became a vital asset connecting Bemus Point and Stow, transporting residents, visitors, and their goods across Chautauqua Lake. And whereas the Bemus Point Stow Ferry continued to be the only means to cross Chautauqua Lake for over 170 years. And whereas the Bemus Point Stow Ferry is celebrating its 200th season of continuous operation and is the only remaining inland ferry east of the Mississippi to reach this milestone. Now therefore I, Gregory J. Edwards, County Executive of Chautauqua County, do hereby proclaim Friday, July 8th, 2011 through Sunday, July 10th, 2011 as Bemus Point Stow Ferry Days. And I invite all Chautauqua County residents and visitors to take part in this historical celebration. And I've executed that as your county executive. And I would ask all of us to enjoy doing this. And we have some new developments to talk about. We've had 200 years of history, but we were successful through a partnership to obtain grant monies and make other investments to have the landings totally rebuilt on the Bemus Point side and on the Stow side. And I hope you'll take a moment to enjoy those today, because up until just weeks ago, they were not in the condition that they are today, nor were they sufficient to handle the travel we have back and forth. I believe we have representatives from CNS Engineers with us today. If you give me a sign, we've got right in the back. CNS Engineers, we give them a round of applause. They not only designed the landings so that they would be effective and last many, many years going forward, but they worked very consistently and tirelessly to make sure it was done for today so that we'd have the ferry open and operating. And Chautauqua County will continue to support the Bemus Stow Ferry as we go forward. I want to thank all of you for joining me here today in this wonderful celebration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. Also representing Chautauqua County, two members of the Chautauqua County Legislature, the Honorable Jay Gould and the Honorable Richard Babbage.
I would just like to say how glad I am to be here. I have very, very fond memories of this ferry. When I was a youngster in the 50s, growing up in Stillwater, this was our only boat on Chautauqua Lake. We kids had a great time riding this ferry, and I've always been very proud of this ferry. Mr. Babbage is going to give you comments or read the commendation.
Thank you, Jay. You haven't heard much history about the ferry. Of course, you can read a lot about it. So now I'm going to give you more of the history. Being a former social studies teacher, I guess this is right up my alley. The Chautauqua County Legislature announces the following commendation. Whereas in March of 1806, William Bemus and his family settled on the east shore of Chautauqua Lake, and Thomas Bemus, the second son, settled on the west side of the lake later the same year. Immediately, the Bemus family began moving goods across the lake, probably by raft. And whereas Chautauqua County was formed in February of 2011, that's an error. Wow, a typing error. As February of 1811, at the first session of a newly formed court on June 25, 1811, and a lease was granted to Thomas D. Bemus to ferry goods, animals, and people across Chautauqua Lake at the Narrows. And whereas Tom Bemus died in 1829, after which many people took over the operation of the ferry for the next 70 years, trying various types of crafts and methods of propulsion. And whereas in 1900 Alton Ball took over the operation of the ferry, introducing upgrades such as a better designed boats, steel cable, the first steam engine, and gas engines, which he would operate the ferry until his death. And whereas in October 1943, Chautauqua County purchased the ferry from the Ball family for $15,000 as part of the war effort. The floating bridge became part of the Chautauqua County highway system, operating 7 days a week from 6 a.m. to midnight and from April through November. And whereas for over 170 years, a ferry operated at the Narrows to avoid the 20-mile-plus trip around the lake. On October 30th, 1982, the 4,357-foot-long Chautauqua Lake Bridge was opened, and the Bemus Point Stow Ferry was leased and later sold to the Sea Lion Ltd. To operate as a tourist attraction. Therefore, let it be known that the Chautauqua County Legislature commemorates the 200 years of service provided by the Bemus Point Stow Ferry. And let it be further known that the Chautauqua County Legislature commends the commitment of all county residents who have run and maintained the ferry throughout its memorable history. Jay will give these commendations to 3 representatives. Shelley Carlson, Mayor Dahlberg, and John Cheney, Director of Vessel Operations. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. That's much appreciated. Our keynote speaker today is Paul Stage. Paul is a certified financial planner in Jamestown and is very familiar with activities aquatic on Lake Chautauqua. He's the current president of the Sea Lion Project. His son owns the Chautauqua Bell, and there's not a better person to describe for us the current state of the Sea Lion Project and the Bemus Point to Stow Ferry. Paul?
Thanks, Terry. I will be necessarily brief. Just take a second and talk a little bit about where we've been and where we're going to. Before I get into that, I'd like to thank Terry for everything that he has done. I don't know that anybody's done that, and if you could all just give him a round of applause. He has worked, you know, the mark of a good organization or a general is the legions behind him, and Terry has been just awesome. He's worked day and night on a volunteer